She huffed. "I won't admit defeat." Saying so, she turned and left. Lin watched her, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, he saw Charlotte and a few others enter the dungeon. Lin witnessed something incredible. Dungeons had cooldown periods, but Charlotte had just come out. How could she go back in so quickly? He had tried both normal and nightmare difficulties, and dungeons always had cooldowns. Yet Charlotte could re-enter repeatedly. An hour later, she completed another dungeon run. After coming out of the dungeon, Charlotte didn't forget to glance back at Lin. He could see her exhaustion from her expression, the kind of fatigue that resulted from continuous battles. Shortly after, in just a little over 10 minutes, Charlotte found another team and went into the dungeon again. Half an hour later, exhausted, she exited from the dungeon. She was so tired that she didn't even want to move a finger. Charlotte, with her weariness, sat down beside Lin. Lin asked her why she was pushing herself so hard, and Charlotte replied with annoyance, she can't believe that Lin has the nerve to ask her why. For years, she is always second behind Lin. She must surpass Lin. Lin never expected Charlotte to hold such deep resentment. If he had known, he would have given her an easy time during a certain exam and let her achieve first place too. Charlotte looked up at the sky. She also wanted to get into Xiajing Academy. Level 15 would be secure, but level 16 would guarantee her admission. Lin recommended her to run nightmare-level dungeons to level up faster. Charlotte stared at Lin with her big eyes, thinking he was joking or perhaps teasing her. Nightmare dungeons required elite teams, and those people were all 16 or 17 level professionals. Nobody would take a level 12 like her. Charlotte gave Lin a disdainful look, as if saying, "Do you even understand anything at all?" Hearing Lin's silence, Charlotte continued, "That's why she better run several more normal-level dungeons. She should be able to get to level 14, and with some effort, level 15 might be possible." Finally, Lin spoke up, finally asking how Charlotte was able to bypass the dungeon cooldown. Charlotte turned into a surprised Pikachu face, not expecting that there were things Lin didn't know. Lin didn't speak, only silently watching Charlotte for her answer. Seeming to have found something fun, Charlotte had a mischievous grin on her face, teasing Lin to say something nice. Then she would tell him. Lin turned his head away, closing his eyes. Seeing this, she pouted, showing him her cool-down amulet. Lin quickly recalled that this item was not something taught in school. Charlotte said that the cooldown amulet could offset the dungeon cooldown time, allowing people to enter the dungeon repeatedly. The amulet looked like a stopwatch. Under the detection spell, Lin obtained the item information, primary cooldown amulet. Available usage, 7/10. Introduction. This item can offset the dungeon's cooldown time, only effective for dungeons below level 20. This was the first time Lin had heard of this item. Lin asked if this item was expensive. Charlotte didn't know, because it was given to her by her father. But she remembered her dad's expression. He seemed a bit distressed when handing it over to her. Charlotte's family was very wealthy, with many successful companies under their names, and very well known in the Western Sea City. If someone like her father would find something expensive, the item itself was obviously valuable. Charlotte scratched her hair. She had to use up all 7 dungeon reset chances within 2 days, and she felt like she might be exhausted to death. Seeing her troubled expression, Lin thought for a moment, offering to carry her through the dungeon. He guaranteed that Charlotte could level up to 15 without lifting a finger. Charlotte suddenly remembered this stern guy beside her could solo dungeons. Charlotte quickly made a decision, willing to share the amulet with him. Lin knew even though the experience gained each time would be less, the fact that there were more entries which will result in a greater overall gain. It was a win-win situation, and Charlotte happily agreed. Lin told Charlotte to rest first, and they would start running the dungeon in 2 hours. Charlotte stretched lazily, preparing to nap. She quickly fell asleep, drifting off within moments. Sleeping so defenselessly in the wilderness was quite dangerous. However, Charlotte slept peacefully, because Lin was by her side. Charlotte curled up, sleeping soundly like a kitten with a small smile at the corner of her mouth. 2 hours later, Lin's dungeon cooldown ended. Charlotte got up, stretching languidly, accompanying Lin into the dungeon with a skeletal warrior on their side. Charlotte used the primary cooldown amulet, making her dungeon cooldown time disappear. Lin started the dungeon, then selected the nightmare level difficulty. Charlotte's face changed drastically, thinking that Lin had chosen the wrong level. Before her words fell, the two had already disappeared at the entrance of the dungeon. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere made it hard for Charlotte to breathe. She clung tightly to Lin, staring at Lin in fear. Lin turned his head back to look at her, asking if she was scared. Bracing herself, Charlotte declared she wasn't scared, but just looking at the terrifying attributes of the monsters made her teeth chatter. Lin told her that all she had to do was follow him. A large number of skeleton warriors appeared in the room. An unwillingness rose in her heart, and she quickly caught up with Lin. They ran through the long mine tunnel, seeing the Mine Wolf King boss. The nightmare-level Wolf King was twice larger than the normal-level Wolf King. A skeleton warrior slain a nearby elite monster and then threw the elite monster's corpse into the air toward the Wolf King. At the same time, Lin also raised his hand. Corpse explosion! A huge explosion rang out, and the terrifying sound startled Charlotte. Experience rapidly increased, and a swarm of notifications surged in. Several more loud explosions followed. The Wolf King, who was unimaginably terrifying in her eyes, fell to the ground with a howl. The Wolf King that would usually take a team of 20 minutes to kill had been vanquished instantly within less than a second. She then realized that this was not a normal level, but a nightmare-level dungeon. When Charlotte learned that Lin had started soloing nightmare-level dungeons from level 10, she finally understood why Lin could level up so quickly. From the moment they entered the dungeon till now, it had only been around 10 minutes, and they were already about to face the final boss. The enormous Goblin King stood before them. Then, the skeleton warriors charged up like bears to a beehive, swarming the Goblin King. With a dozen ear-splitting sounds, everything returned to calm. A level-up glow appeared around Lin. He leveled up to 15. Charlotte. Looking at the item drop, it was a shame it wasn't staff. Hearing this, suddenly a black shadow flew towards her. Charlotte instinctively reached out and caught it. Lin handed the Goblin King's staff to Charlotte. Seeing that Lin hadn't used any weapons from start to finish, Charlotte knew in her heart that Lin didn't care about attributes from these bronze-level gears. Lin didn't know what Charlotte was thinking. He was currently checking the changes in his attributes after leveling up. He quickly calculated that he could reach level 16 after running the dungeon 5 more times. Looking at the Goblin King lying on the ground, he touched it and apologized, saying he would kill it 5 more times. Seeing Lin actually talking to the Goblin King, Charlotte found it very strange. The boss obviously couldn't understand him. For some reason, Charlotte thought of the scene where Lin had just apologized to the boss, and she suddenly found Lin somewhat endearing and cute. Upon leaving the dungeon, Charlotte immediately used the primary cooldown charm. Only a dozen seconds later, they entered the nightmare-level Western Sea Mine dungeon again. The second time they entered, Charlotte seemed like a completely different person. As she ran with Lin, she was in a state of excitement. The excitement overflowing on her face made Lin feel a bit strange. The third time, fourth time, and fifth time, quickly, they have used up all of the entries. Charlotte successfully leveled up to 14. There was still a day and a half left before the final exam. They could run the dungeon 2 more times, and by then, she would definitely reach level 15. Charlotte temporarily lost her competitive mindset towards Lin. She knew that they could definitely enter the Xiajing Academy together. Charlotte suddenly asked if Lin was interested in competing for the top position in the province. Charlotte explained that if Lin could become the top place in the province, he could earn a lot of points. Most importantly, there was an opportunity to join the Creator Academy. The Creator Academy is the strongest academy within the Empire. While the Xiajing Academy recruits prodigies, the Creator Academy is for the top-ranking individuals among those prodigies. Charlotte looked at Lin with her brilliant eyes. She genuinely thought Lin had a chance. Lin spoke softly. He was determined to go to the Xiajing Academy where his sister was. If given the opportunity, he would also try to enter the Creator Academy at a future date. Suddenly, Charlotte saw a blond young man behind Lin. She recognized him at a glance. It was Gao Yang. He was at the entrance of the dungeon, seemingly looking for a team. Gao Yang was already at level 11, but unfortunately at level 11, knights just couldn't tank the monsters. As expected, after searching for a while, Gao Yang couldn't find a team and looked disappointed. Lin was ready to take Gao Yang to grind the dungeon together. Charlotte chuckled and followed him. In an office, a chubby middle-aged man was shouting at a young man, blaming him for having the audacity to block the dungeons and preventing others to join. He was breaking the rules and possibly offending both the Empire and the Profession Association by doing this. The middle-aged man rubbed his brow. After all, this was his son. He instructed the young man to stay at home for the next few days and wait for the final exam. The young man asked about the missing guild members, and the chubby guild president replied that he had already sent people to investigate. The president sneered. It seemed that someone dared to challenge his dynasty guild. In front of the dungeon, Charlotte called Gao Yang over. Gao Yang's eyes were rolling rapidly, revealing a profound and meaningful smile. Charlotte's tsundere personality was well known. Only when she was with Lin would she tone it down a bit. She raised her fist and made a threatening gesture. Gao Yang was startled, saying he was just joking. Charlotte told him to follow them to grind the dungeon together. Gao Yang let out an excited howl, clasped his hands together and thanked them both. Gao Yang's expressions and actions were extremely exaggerated. Charlotte clenched her fist and said if he continued like this, she wouldn't take him. Gao Yang immediately surrendered, instantly becoming serious. But seeing him like this made Charlotte want to punch him even more. Charlotte snorted, and a fireball appeared in the palm of her hand telling him to act natural. If Gao Yang dared to say anything more, she would definitely throw this fireball at his face. When Gao Yang learned that the two had a 10-hour cooldown, he then decided to go grind some wild monsters and let the two rest. Before he left, he winked at Lin, cheered him on to conquer Charlotte tonight, and then ran off as fast as he could. Charlotte stomped her foot in anger and threw the fireball at him. The fireball landed on the ground, but the sparks caught on Gao Yang, and he cried out loudly. Covering his butt, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. 10 hours later, Gao Yang joined the team, and they entered the nightmare-level dungeon. As soon as he entered the dungeon, Gao Yang was the first to be scared and paralyzed on the ground. Just like Charlotte before, he thought that Lin had selected the wrong difficulty. Charlotte snorted and told him to talk less and just follow them. Gao Yang showed a variety of expressions, such as puzzlement, panic, and fear. 10 minutes later, Gao Yang was still gaping at the sight of the dead boss. He wiped the corner of his mouth and suddenly hugged Lin's thigh, saying that he wanted Lin to carry him every day, and he could dress up in skirts and cheerleader outfits to cheer Lin on. Charlotte helplessly remarked that Gao Yang had no backbone and lacked the spirit of a knight. Gao Yang didn't care. With Lin's presence, who needs to be a knight? Lin shook his head and then calculated in his heart. After one more run, he would reach level 16, Charlotte would reach level 15, and Gao Yang would reach level 12. As for Gao Yang, he wasn't planning to go to Xiajing Academy. His goal was another higher-level academy in the province that wasn't as competitive. The setting sun cast long shadows over everything. On the southern city wall of Western Sea City, several principals stood together, looking at the wild area outside the city wall. Tomorrow was the day of the final exam. They didn't know how well these children would do. An elderly principal asked Principal Lu about the two prodigies from his school, wondering if they were also preparing for the Xiajing Academy. Principal Lu looked unblinkingly into the distance and nodded. He knew that the competition for Xiajing Academy was the most intense. According to previous year's standards, only those at level 15 had a decent chance, while those at level 16 could guarantee their admission. He sighed, recalling over the years, only Su Qianxing and Lin's sister from their city had ever reached level 16 before the final exam. He wondered if these two youngsters this year had a chance. Finally, a few students appeared in their line of sight. Under the detection spell, a level 12 gladiator named John came into view, followed by a level 13 female archer named Bright. One by one, the students returned, while the principals continued to use detection spells on the city wall. This time, every year was actually a pre-exam competition among the principals to see whose students were the most outstanding. As the sky darkened, Principal Lu began to feel anxious. Charlotte, Lin, and Gao Yang hadn't returned yet. Finally, just before the night fully set in, Principal Lu saw 3 figures in the distance. A smile immediately appeared on his face. The result wasn't important, as long as they returned safely. Detection spells flew out one after another. Gao Yang was at level 12, and Charlotte was at level 15, causing the principals to express surprise one after another. The last one, Lin, was at level 16, and all of the principals gasped in surprise. Lin had really reached level 16, one level higher than Charlotte. Seeing Gao Yang's shield and Charlotte's magic staff, they then understood that these children had cleared many dungeons. Principal Lu was delighted and let the 3 of them get on the bus first, and he was in a great mood. After all of the students have returned, he had won out in front of the other principals. Moreover, perhaps this time both Lin and Charlotte could be admitted to Xiajing Academy, which would be an extremely honorable achievement for Western Sea City and the high school. As night fell, Lin continued his meditation. He followed his own thoughts and didn't place too much emphasis on the final exam. He was confident he would definitely get into Xiajing Academy. If he had a chance, he would also try to strive for the top spot in the province. The next morning, Lin woke up on time. Exactly 100 skeleton warriors were quietly waiting in the summoning space. Arriving at the school, many classmates had already arrived. Gao Yang waved vigorously at Lin, and after a while, Charlotte also arrived. Charlotte was much more popular than Lin, and the students flocked around her. But contrary to her usual demeanor, Charlotte came over to Lin and asked him how he was feeling. Lin nodded slightly in response. Charlotte smiled and hoped to see Lin at Xiajing Academy. After everyone had arrived, Principal Lu came over and gave each person a teleportation stone. The teleportation stone would take everyone to the exam site. Principal Lu once again reminded the students to pay attention to their safety. The students activated their teleportation stones one by one, and with a stream of light, each person disappeared. The exam site was extremely spacious, like a huge square. There were probably tens of thousands of people. The light of teleportation never stopped. The examinees from Western Sea City were all distributed in the same area. Under the gaze of everyone, a towering gate descended from the sky. The trial tower was activated, and a solemn voice resounded across the entire square. It started explaining the exam rules. The stern voice wouldn't let students speak or ask questions. Violators would be directly disqualified from the exam. A few were whispering. At this time, the trial tower suddenly shot out a few rays of light that landed on these few students. These students then instantly disappeared. Gao Yang immediately covered his mouth. The rules were so strict. At this moment, the entire venue was exceptionally quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Even breathing became careful and cautious. The stern voice spoke up again. The trial tower would arrange different exams according to professions. Combat types would have combat exams, and support professions would have non-combat exams. After passing the basic exam, each profession will have the right to choose the difficulty level. Various difficulties and results will grant points. Apart from personal equipment, no other items can be used. The stern voice detailed the rules of the exam. Everyone queued up to enter the trial tower one by one. Lin followed the crowd into the tower. At the top of the trial tower, there were several stern-faced and imposing individuals. They were the examiners in charge of this year's final exam in the province. Seeing the rare profession of necromancer, according to the information, it was a type of summoning mage. The person in charge was preparing to set monsters 2 levels higher than Lin, according to the rules for rare mages. A monster appeared before Lin. This monster had a wolf's head but was wearing a robe. It was even holding a magic wand in its hand. Lin found that the detection spell was ineffective here. Apart from the name of the monster, there was no more information. A countdown appeared on the screen. Lin was prepared. Lin raised his left hand, and when the countdown ended, the soul flame fell on the head of the Wolf Beastman mage. With a scream, the Wolf Beastman mage fell straight down. At this time, on the top floor of the tower, the examiners all showed shocked expressions, speechless to see that Lin's enemy was defeated in 0.1 seconds. Inside the trial tower's surveillance room, at the very top of the tower, several examiners wore expressions of astonishment. At this very moment, an elderly man in robe walked into the room. This was Elder Ning. The examiners immediately bowed in greeting to the elder. Elder Ning heard there was a unique profession and wanted to witness him in action. On the screen was the live footage of Lin. The examiners quickly relayed the events that had just transpired. They were preparing to increase the difficulty level, conducting the second test based on the legendary difficulty. However, one of the examiners raised an objection, feeling that this wasn't fair to Lin. Elder Ning chuckled, saying, "In the past, there have been professionals who have slain monsters instantly as well. For this test, they will deem Lin as the top scorer with and reward him the initial 100 points. If Lin passes the second test, they'll grant an additional 1,000 points." Elder Ning was prepared to provide these points from his own pocket. After waiting for a short while, another monster materialized before Lin. The announcer once again instructed Lin to prepare for the second test. The rule was simple: defeat the monster before him. Despite this being the second test, Lin didn't find it strange. He believed this was just the normal rule of the trial. As the countdown ended, he once again unleashed his soul flame. The mage monster before him let out a harrowing scream and was instantly obliterated. Another instant kill. The examiners all turned to look at Elder Ning simultaneously. Elder Ning simply smiled, telling them to proceed with the second round of the examination. As the first round test concluded, the authoritative voice echoed in the ears of all the examinees, informing them that out of over 10,000 combat class students, only half had passed the first round. The scores were then announced. Without a doubt, Lin was in first place. A girl named May was second, while Charlotte ranked third. Richard from the Dynasty Guild secured fourth place with a time of 5.5 seconds. Upon seeing these rankings, Richard's anger reached its peak. He couldn't believe he hadn't even made it into the top 3. Glancing at Lin's 0.1 second score, he was convinced there had been a system error. That voice resounded once more, announcing the starting of second round of the examination. The voice emphasized the potential dangers of this round. There might be casualties, and all candidates must judge their abilities wisely. If they face danger, they may withdraw during the test. The second round was structured like a dungeon raid, divided into 3 difficulty levels: normal, nightmare, and hell, with different points awarded for each level. Lin quickly discovered that the goal of the second round was to see who could slay the most monsters within 30 minutes. Without a second thought, Richard chose the hell difficulty. In his eyes, killing a monster in hell difficulty was equivalent to defeating 5 in the normal difficulty. He summoned his weapon, revealing his class as a berserker. Charlotte pondered for a moment and decided on the normal difficulty. As an elemental mage, she wasn't adept at close combat, so she aimed to win by quantity over quality. Inside the surveillance room, the examiners were commenting on each candidate's choices. May, who was in second place and also was a shadow hunter, which was a rare assassin-type class, also opted for hell difficulty. By now, most of the noteworthy candidates had made their choices, with only Lin remaining. Every examiner was eager to witness Lin's choice and his performance. After hearing the rules, Lin formed his own judgment. This was a test on individuals' stamina. Engaging in continuous combat for 30 minutes would strain any class, though Lin felt he was an exception. Lin chose hell difficulty. Outside the examination area, all the school principals from province had gathered. Every principal looked on enviously at Principal Liu. Principal Liu was visibly ecstatic after seeing Lin's performance. Once all the candidates had made their selections and the countdown ended, the second round of the examination began. In an instant, Lin was transported into a separate space. A beast clad in armor emerged from the ground, letting out an enraged roar. It was an elite orc warrior, with all its attributes in triple digits. Lin glanced at its seemingly pitiful stats, shaking his head, feeling it was too weak. It was much weaker than the nightmare-class mobs from the Western Sea Mine dungeon. He also understood that this was just a test. If the monsters were too strong, there would be a large-scale elimination. Lin summoned 2 skeletal warriors, each with an impressive 4 stats, all 2500. They charged towards the pitiable elite orc warrior and killed it in less than 1 second. After each monster was defeated, it took 5 seconds for another to spawn. The examiners in the monitoring room were left dumbfounded. They couldn't believe that Lin's summoned creatures were so powerful, and that he had 2 of them. After witnessing several of these instant kills, the examiners had grown numb to the sight. Monsters would spawn and die in an instant. The examiners no longer wanted to watch, turning their attention to the other participants. Richard, with redness in his eyes, activated his berserk mode, swung his massive sword non-stop. Charlotte held her staff, casting large fireball spells. Turning attention back to Lin, he was seen comfortably settled in a corner, eating a sweet potato which he pulled out from his pocket. Some examiners noted this down, while others eyed Lin's sweet potato, feeling a pang of hunger. Elder Ning had been silent since the beginning of this round, watching Lin intently. He was deeply intrigued by Lin. As the 30 minutes quickly elapsed and the test concluded, Richard, panting heavily, slumped to the ground. He had defeated 50 monsters and believed he was in the lead. After half of the participants were eliminated in the first round, another half dropped out in the second round, either due to failure or voluntary withdrawal. Eagerly awaiting the results, Richard's anticipation peaked when the scores were announced. To his astonishment, he ranked 4th once again, while Lin had scored a staggering 1605 points. Jumping to his feet, he quickly calculated in his head. In the hell difficulty, each monster was worth 5 points, so the maximum points one could earn in a minute was 60, making the limit for 30 minutes 1,800 points. With a score like Lin's, it meant he had killed 301 monsters, and he would have killed all of the monster instantly. This was impossible. Outside the examination hall, Principal Liu trembled uncontrollably, his cup quaking in his hand, spilling its contents. Even in the past, where the 2 prodigy from their province, Su Qianxing and Lin Mohan, had only scored 700 and 650 points respectively, Principal Liu was at a loss for words. Soon, the 3rd round of the examination began. This time, the candidates would face a boss-level monster. There were also 3 levels of difficulty. Without giving it a second thought, Lin opted for the hell difficulty. He was up against the boss-level orc captain. Observing the monster's stats, Lin felt it was somewhat underwhelming. Even though it was the hell difficulty, the boss seemed to have been significantly weakened. He also realized that it would be unlikely for the examination to present a genuine hell-level boss, as it would inevitably lead to student casualties. The same location, the same format, but a different opponent. Lin once again summoned 2 skeletal warriors. Feeling a tinge of disappointment, he found the test too simple. Richard engaged the boss head-on, recklessly clashing with it. Charlotte, on the other hand, continuously dodged the orc captain's attacks while retaliating with her fireball. Mei utilized a stealth ability, positioning herself behind the boss, waiting for the right moment to strike. Back to Lin, his 2 skeletal warriors unleashed a rampage strike. Their weapons glowed red, and with a strike from each, they finished off the boss with ease. The examiners engaged in discussion, realizing they still hadn't gauged Lin's true strength. They could only wait for the 5th round of tests. Some believed that the 5th round would surely reveal his genuine capabilities. Listening to the examiners' discussions, Elder Ning simply kept stroking his beard, with most of his attention focused on Lin. The results were once again displayed. Unsurprisingly, Lin remained in the top position. He quickly scanned for Gao Yang's position. Although he was only ranked 670th, the score was still commendable. Lin was delighted to see that Gao Yang was not eliminated. The 4th round of the examination started shortly after. The voice of the examiner echoed once more, informing the candidates that the difficulty of this test would increase further. They were given the option to withdraw. With their current scores, admission into a top 100 academy in the kingdom was already assured. Yet no one chose to bow out. A golden light shone down,